Welcome to another tale from the Zodiac, the in-house magazine of cable and wireless. In the pages of the Zodiac there are many stories, and here we present a story from the Korean War. It follows the company's field wireless telegraph unit as it attempts to set up a direct service with Hong Kong for troops' messages and war correspondents' dispatches. It is written by J.G. Stroud and is quoted here verbatim. With Hong Kong fading astern, the Telcom team for Korea was at last underway. After the first flurry of activity, with staff flown from as far afield as Bermuda and Borneo, there had been a prolonged period of waiting in Hong Kong. This was necessary for the purpose of organization, but nonetheless irritating to those members keen to move on. Manager N.W. Barnes had flown ahead via Tokyo. He was already in Korea when the 10 remaining members of the unit, 8 operators and 2 engineers, with 10 tons of equipment and 2 vehicles, set sail. The voyage north was extended by persistent bad weather, and it was at this time that the Telcom party, almost all of them direct from living in subtropical climates, made a new acquaintance, a small bird, becoming known as the key bird from its habit of sitting, muffled in a duffel coat, in northern latitudes, crying key, key, crikey, it's cold, has since become the mascot and faithful follower of the unit. No one can say that he was favourably impressed by his first sight of Busan, Korea's southernmost port. Bleak, cold, and grey in the early morning light, it looked fully deserving of the term Port of Nowhere. Even the sight of N.W. Barnes' cheerful figure striding along the quayside did little to dispel the gloom. It took 2 days for the Telcom equipment to be sorted out from a large quantity of supplies. The gear was then loaded onto a railway truck, with the staff taking watches throughout the day and night to superintend the operation, and more important, to prevent pilfering, a disease not uncommon in more civilized ports. Early, much too early in the opinion of the majority of the team, on the morning of November 12th, the party joined a British road convoy going north. A 10-ton lorry belonging to the company, alternatively driven by R. Goody and W. Locklear, experienced petrol trouble. It had to drop out and follow later. The remainder progressed uneventfully, if not particularly comfortably. There has been a great deal written about Korean roads, but no words could do adequate justice. They are atrocious. In places, mere tracks, churned up by the passage of tanks, and the powdery surface dust finds its way through every crack. Daegu, the convoy's destination, was reached at about 4 p.m. Now the time spent by Barnes ahead of the main body began to prove its value. Billets had been arranged. They were bare and extremely cold, but it was shelter. There were many difficulties at first, but these mainly lessened as the unit fell in with army routine. The following morning, and for the ensuing 2 days, the staff worked under the amiable instruction of Tony Pudner, engineer, to unload, unpack, and commence the installation of the equipment. On the 3rd day, plans were changed, and it was decided to move northwards nearer to the front. So the equipment was systematically repacked, retaken to the railway station, and reloaded onto a wagon for Pyongyang, the capital of North Korea. their perspiration shed, physically manhandling each and every piece of equipment, in particular a certain diesel generator that had to be moved an inch at a time by the combined effort of the team and anyone else who could be persuaded or impressed to lend a hand, will long be remembered by all. To facilitate travelling and to ensure that the equipment was safely delivered on board the vessel, which was to take it north, the team was split into two parts. Brown, Howes, Woodley, Fulbrook, Simmons, and Tony Pudner accompanied the railed equipment back to Pusan, travelling in fact in the same boxcar, for such is the usual wartime method of railway travel in Korea, while Parker, Locklear, Stroud, and Godey, with the manager, took the two vehicles by road. When the equipment was safely aboard a very microscopic ship, it was found that there was only so-called passenger accommodation for 2 persons, so Pudner and Brown went to Pyongyang by that means. The others of the first party short-circuited all the rest by flying, and arrived at their destination 4 days before the road party. As they were not able to carry heavy kit by air, they had to live in extreme discomfort and cold, with only 2 blankets apiece. The 2 who went by sea fared even worse. It took them 8 days for a normal 3-day trip. Meanwhile, the smaller party had joined themselves on to a small British road convoy and had duly left Daegu. The roads northward were no worse than those in the south, but the signs of war damage were much more frequent. Rivers had to be forded as the bridges were out, and discarded war material was an ever-increasing hazard. The journey was accomplished in 4 daily stages, with an extra day's stay at Suwon, 20 miles south of Seoul. The Korean countryside as seen on this journey had a monotonous sameness. There always seemed to be the same greenish-grey paddy fields alongside the road. Each hut was the exact counterpart of 100 others, and there was always, just a little way off, the sharply etched row of mountains against a steel blue sky. The night stops on the way north, Daejeon, Suwon, and Kaesong, just south of the 38th parallel, lived up to the worst expectations of transit camps. At Suwon, the convoy was delayed by some vehicles freezing up. The Telcom party consisted of wise virgins, for it had acquired a supply of antifreeze before leaving Daegu. On the 5th day, after the longest day's run of the best roads so far encountered, Telcom entered Pyongyang. The unit's billets were with the British Public Relations Service, in some university buildings a few miles to the north of the capital. This seat of learning seems to have been devoted to the extensive reading of the lives of Lenin and Stalin, in Russian, to judge from the literature left about the place. As the heavy equipment had not yet reached Chinapu, the port for Pyongyang, 30 miles to the southwest, little could be done towards preparing the station. However, the diesel generator was offloaded and started up. This at least gave us electric light, whereas the rest of the town was still in darkness, with the more luxurious billets provided with candles. The rest of the day, and some of the night, was spent in collecting enough of anything which burned to keep ourselves from freezing. A bowl of dirty water flung outside immediately became solid before it could sink into the very hard ground. In the mornings, in order to get water with which to wash, one had to knock off a lump of ice and get it thawed somehow before putting it into a kettle. On November 29th, came the news of the communist offensive, and the team was alerted for immediate evacuation. By this time, we were rather alarmed by the non-arrival of the heavy gear which should have come by sea. However, we were told late in the evening of the 30th that the ship had reached Chinapu, but that unloading had been forbidden and the ship was being turned round to go back south. Early in the morning of December 1st, the team left. N.W. Barnes remained behind to settle up a few matters, such as the eventual setting up place of the station now that the equipment had to be returned to the south. He got out by air the following afternoon. The whole team is now safely in South Korea again, going ahead with what it is hoped will be the final location of the station. However, the journey south from Pyongyang was far from uneventful. The road party, consisting of 8 of the team, Pudner and Brown had to go to sea again with the heavy gear, travelled south by themselves in the 2 vehicles. With no convoy to impede progress, and Bob Gowdy setting the pace in the lorry, Seoul was reached in 1 day. The following night, despite a wheel change on the 3-ton truck in the snow, saw the group bedded down at Taejong. Next morning, misfortune, in the shape of a wrongly marked detour, set Telcom off on the wrong road. For the better part of that day, the 2 vehicles wandered amid the mountains. The scenery was glorious, the sun shining out of a clear blue sky, reflecting on the snow-clad peaks, made an inspiring picture. The fact that no one on the party knew where they were did nothing to mar their enjoyment of the trip. The village, with a Korean who spoke some English, gave a clue as to the direction. Several miles further on, the grind over the mountains took its toll, and the truck broke down. Stranded on a lonely mountain road with night rapidly coming on, and the temperature somewhere way below wasn't too pleasing a prospect. So the party was divided, C.V. Parker and F.C. Simmons taking the Land Rover and hastening back to the village for aid, the others staying to guard the truck and to ascertain the extent of the damage. In a comparatively short while, the Land Rover was back, bringing help in the shape of a large American truck and a squad of Korean troops. The truck was to tow the Telcom vehicle back to the village, while the troops were for escort. The necessity for an escort was questioned, and the answer was that the hills were infested by guerrillas and dangerous to travellers, particularly after nightfall. The Telcom group learned later that a few hours previously, on the road over which they had travelled, unarmed and in all innocence, 40-odd guerrillas had been killed in an encounter with South Korean troops. Back in the village, Chainang by name and non-existent save on the larger-scale maps, the party were given a royal welcome by the Korean troops. The battalion commander, Major Chow Young-do, hastened over to welcome them personally and to invite them to the police station for drinks with the chief of police. As the major had a fair command of English, matters progressed quite smoothly, and no doubt the locally brewed apple brandy that circulated did much to foster good relations. The night was passed with Major Chu Young-do in his house. The party slept Korean style on the floor, 9 in one small room, lying head to toe in order to fit in everyone. As the room was heated by a fire beneath the floor, it was the only time since their arrival in Korea that anyone of the Telcom men complained of excessive warmth. Next morning, the whole party enjoyed the hospitality of a local doctor for breakfast in the Korean manner. Sitting cross-legged on mats at low tables was a novelty, and the quantity of food provided came as a surprise to all. Chicken and pork, beautifully cooked, were accompanied by an unnumbered host of side dishes, and instead of more prosaic tea or coffee, the group enjoyed hot rice wine. Later that day, the party was again divided into two. C.V. Parker, R.B. Howes, W.W. Locklear, and F.C. Simmons taking the Land Rover and leaving for Taegu in search of spare parts and help for the truck. The remaining four elected to try and repair the 3-tonner under the leadership and guidance of R. Goldie. By dint of much hammering and a few Scottish expletives, it was patched up after a fashion by the evening. Once more, Major Chu Young-doo's hospitality was enjoyed, and his bedroom shared, before Telcom finally left Chenan. Again they moved at the crack of dawn, going carefully over the icy mountain roads. 3 miles out of town, the truck came to a halt, and P.J.F. Woodley and L.G. Stroud had to go back for petrol, while J.E. Fulbrook and R. Goldie stayed to watch the truck and its contents. All told, it took 5.5 hours to travel the first 25 miles. As troubles occurred, they were ironed out. Eventually, the party reached Daejeon late in the afternoon of the same day. Another night, another dawn, and off again on the final leg of the journey. This time, a double check was made to be sure of the correct road. 30 miles beyond Daejeon, the vehicle was hailed and halted by a small convoy of British trucks, out of which tumbled W.W. Locklear at the head of a small army. There were 24 men bristling with weapons, 2 officers, 2 mechanics, and a doctor, the Telcom relief force. This array had been turned out by the army authorities in response to the request for aid by the Land Rover party. It was considered the minimum necessary to travel through the country, traversed unaided by the 2 companies' trucks. For the last lap of the trip, Telcom travelled in style, with a full military escort. Back in Taegu, there was a pause in operations, while the question of where the station was to be set up was discussed with the authorities in Japan. A.S. Budner and S.J. Brown flew in, having left the ship at Incheon. They were full of tales of a nautical flavour, and when Manager Barnes came back from Tokyo with new instructions for siting the station, Brown and Pudner departed for Pusan to superintend the unloading and sending up to the new position the bulk of the equipment. In this way, they were later joined by R.B. Howes and P.J.F. Woodley, and all came back with the equipment by road. At this point, the work really commenced. Nissan huts for the office and transmitting station were erected, and all the gear unpacked and put together. Digging holes for stays for the aerial masts in rocky ground was hard going, but with the whole staff to pull on the ropes and the manager as anchorman, the masts went up easily enough. On the morning of the 4th day, December 24th, contact was made with Hong Kong. Although there was no immediate rush of traffic, it began to build up later. If you liked this video, why not give it a thumbs up and leave a comment, and subscribe to our channel. It would really help. Thank you very much.